Hello, hope all is well, and today marks the start of, well, a new series that I'll be doing on the channel called Pimp My Preset. Thanks Carl from the Fractal Forum for the name. And no, it's not just a 90s throwback. In essence, what I'd like to do here is to go through presets that you send me and basically offer advice on things that I would suggest to do to maybe improve the tone, or maybe ideas on how to do things differently to hopefully get a better tone out of the preset that you're working with. Now, a quick disclaimer, obviously there are many different ways to go about things in the fractal world, and every setup is different. And tone is subjective after all. And this is also a learning process for me as well, as hopefully through watching this or other people watching this, people can also offer advice, comments and things like that, so that, you know, I get different ideas and different perspective on how to approach presets. And this is the email that I got. Hi, I'm from Taiwan and I wonder how I can improve the distortion tone of my rhythm guitar as well as better utilize my entire preset and pedalboard setup. I'm using HSS LTD ST-203 FR. I often play worship songs, Hillsong and Gateway. Now, if you're interested in submitting your preset to this, I'll put more details in the description box below, but essentially it's as easy as just answering a few questions so I know a bit more about the preset, and then sending me this via email. I'll put the info on screen now, and otherwise it's in the description box below. And now onto the preset. So I looked at this preset in advance just to prep a little bit, and I think we'll address the first question that you had with regards to your overdrive tone. And something I noticed is in the overdrive scene, for example. So I presume this second gate block is meant to be as an extra noise gate, as you've got a lot of gain that's going afterwards. So you have the rat distortion that is gain on full, levels pulled back a bit, and then the amp is also fully gained up. So it's we're looking at the AC20 in this case, and because of that, I think you gain a lot of gain, and you have no headroom on the amp. Just that's how the model here is set up. So you've gunned out the gain on the actual amp itself, and you're also gunning the drive of the distortion or the drive before that. So what I would suggest to do here would be to actually pull back the distortion on the drive pedal, and then more importantly the gain on the actual amp itself. So just to give you some idea, I'll pull back the gain to 5 on here, and we'll leave the drive actually as is, and we'll see how that sounds. So with that, you gain more definition already, because the amp still has headroom. So those are things that I would suggest to look at. Later on in this video, I'll go over things that I would suggest to use perhaps in combination with this amp. But we'll start off with suggestions for you to try to tweak the tone. And then later in the video, I'll go over things that I would do using this preset as a basis So one big thing I noticed is that you have these parallel blocks that when activated, they also boost. And at the same time, you're also using scene levels. So you've got different scene levels with different volumes. That's fine, of course, but if you're also compensating for that or having different volume levels through effects, it can sometimes be a bit confusing, especially for someone like me when I'm looking at a preset like this and I'm trying out different scenes and I see these different volumes, and at the same time I've got to bear in mind, okay, the scene levels are also playing into it. It can make it a bit difficult, or a bit more difficult sometimes, in balancing out the volumes that you've got going on with the preset. So I would suggest, for me at least, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset all the scene levels so that they're at 0, and then look at basically equalizing or balancing out the volumes of the different scenes. As this is in a worship scenario, I can imagine that in terms of volume levels, you'd want them to be a bit more aligned or very aligned. And that's maybe to some extent why you're using some of the scene levels. But we can look at this again afterwards once we've done various tweaks and then tweaked the various blocks. Now the thing here is we have two parallel blocks, so delay up here, and then a plex delay below. And I noticed on both of these blocks across all of the scenes, kill dry isn't activated, and basically they're set up so that, you know, when some of them are activated, you've got an extra boost as well. Now the way of using parallel blocks is typically, you know, to use kill dry, something new that they've added in more recent firmwares. So kill dry should be activated on both of these, and then you use the mix level to sort of set how much mix of that effect that you want within the preset. So I'll do that now, and I'll add kill dry across all of the channels of these two blocks. And the easy way of doing this, and a huge thanks to Leon Todd for bringing this up in a, I think it was a G66 video, is for example on this plex delay block, if I activate kill dry and then hold shift, right click, I can then say set in multiple presets and then set across all channels. I can double click to save it, it'll do its thing, and then across all channels kill dry will be activated. So this is really useful when looking at, say, a preset or tweaking a preset, to quickly add the same setting across all the channels instead of having to go through each one. And I'll do the same to the delay block. So looking at the cab block, so depending on the scenes, so we're using a legacy 2x12 for like the more clean stuff. And then when we switch to drive sounds, we go to a 4x12. And what I would suggest to keep a bit more of a balance between the different tones, you don't have to do this of course, but if you're going for that kind of pedal board in front of an amp vibe, it can be quite good for consistency reasons to use the same cab across all your scenes. And that way, when you're adding, say, drive, gain and things like that, it will sound consistent when you're switching between the scenes. This isn't a must, but this is something that I do, for example, to keep things consistent. I'll use the same cab across all of the scenes, and then I'll use the same amp maybe, or change the amp, but the cab will always stay the same. And then something else I also noticed is within the room and air tab. So on the overdrive scenes, it's not active, but on all the clean scenes, you've got a bit of room level that's added here. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but you also have this reverb block that's active. So in essence, by adding a bit of room level, you're doubling up on the reverb. It might be a feel thing, who knows, but it also uses more CPU. So as you can see, we're hovering around 77%. And if I zero out the room air, we'll drop down to around the 74%. So that might be something to bear in mind if you're trying to save CPU. As this is an FM3 Mark1, every little bit helps. So one of the things I typically do across my presets is to clean up, say, delay sounds or reverb sounds, is to EQ them. And what can really help basically to add clarity is to take off some of the low end, especially in reverbs and with these really big, long, lush sounding reverbs and also delays. This can really help to clear up the signal if you feel that things are a bit too muddy. So to do that, it's super easy. Say in the reverb block, we have the EQ tab, and then we just pull up the low cut frequency to maybe 150 or even 200. And you can also change the low cut slope to have more of an aggressive cut if needed. And then the same thing for the delay and the plex delay. So within the delay block, there's an EQ page. You can do the same here. And also in the plex delay, you've got this tone part where you can adjust low cut. I would also suggest looking at the high cut as well, so you can darken the sound of the reverb, delay, and the plex delay. And so I'd suggest even messing around with the high cut knob or this part, the high cut frequency, and see how you like, say, having this at a lower frequency to see how that feels or sounds to you, and then maybe adjust to taste from there. And for the last few things, you've got a chorus block that I see hasn't been used at all. That's fine, of course, to have different things in here if you want to further add blocks, but if you want to keep saving CPU depending on how much has been used, it's a good idea for completely unused blocks just to shunt them off, and then you'll have the CPU savings as well. Now for the compressor and well, the gate as well, these are things that are dialed depending on your guitar. I picked my Strat as it's probably the closest to the Strat style guitar that you're using as well. And the thing with the gate here is that you're doubling up on your noise gates. So you have a noise gate at the start, and then you also have this extra gate that's set up here. I'll link to a video that I made on setting up noise gates for metal, and there's maybe some information in there that's useful for, say, something like this. I don't mean to set up something that's really harsh and kind of aggressive, but something that might help to bear in mind is that, for example, on the input block, you can see the noise gate is reducing to this amount. If you up the ratio, you can completely turn off or have like a more, not aggressive, but it will really cut off all that extra kind of noise that you might be getting from your guitar. And then in the process, you might not need this extra gate block. But of course, feel free to use that depending on the amount of drive that you want to add or your setup with the amp and the cab. Now, something that you might have noticed as well is sometimes when making certain scene changes, you kind of have that digital like flutter, or it's the delays that are kind of like cutting off, and you get that kind of sound that you just heard there. And the thing here is that one of the, I guess, limitations of the FM3 is that while you might have two delay blocks, we don't have two, say, reverb blocks, and we don't have two plex delay blocks. And so the reason why you're hearing this is that you're switching different plex delay types, for example, or you're switching between different delay types within the same preset but on a different scene. And you know, when you switch from a different reverb type, this will happen as well. And also, especially with the plex delay, when you're switching between different plex delay types, you will get that kind of digital fluttering sound. And the way around it is, well, on say the FM9 and Axe FX3, you can use multiple blocks and sort of switch between them so that, you know, you're turning one off and you'll get the trails from that as you go to another scene, and then you'll switch to another one and you won't be affected by that. However, in the FM3, as we only have one plex delay block, one reverb block, is we have to use kind of other tricks to get around that. And typically this would be to use, say, one reverb and then use something either like a scene controller. And by that I mean by right clicking, say, the mix knob, I can assign a source, and I can assign a scene controller, say scene controller 1, and the other way of doing it is either with a control switch. I find scene controller is probably the most logical kind of way of doing that, because you've assigned a scene controller over here, zero out, attack and release, and then you'll see mix goes down to 0%. And then within controllers and scene control, so we've set it to be scene control 1, so it's scene controller 1, sorry, you can then set the amount of mix that you want per scene with this control here. So as we can see, the reverb is currently at 0% mix in scene 3. If I go to controllers and then set, say, scene 3 to 36%, go back to reverb, it's gone up to 36%. However, when I go to scene 1, it's at 0%. Go back to controllers, within scene control, controller 1, we set scene 1 to be, say, 24%. So now when I go to scene 3, check reverb, we're at 36%, and when I go to scene 1, the mix is at 24%. So that's one way of doing it, so that you can not change or not have to change your reverb type, but you can vary, say, the mix or even other settings simply by right-clicking a knob with this modifier on that. So the time, mix, even level, input gain, and things like that. Admittedly, this is maybe perhaps more of an advanced kind of technique to some extent, as it's not something that you'd immediately think of, but it's a good way of bypassing some of the limitations of the FM3. And so this is the tweaked version of that same preset. And one quick thing that I'll add, and that is in terms of the amp, the AC20 is really good, but I kind of prefer, and as a suggestion, it's the Class A 30 watt Brilliant that was added recently. I feel it has a bit more kind of boldness to the tube. It's maybe a bit bigger sounding, and I felt it really worked well in this kind of setup. Of course, you can set it back to channel A and use the amp that you used to, or use any amp that you want. These are just suggestions, of course. Now for some of the tweaks, or the big tweaks under the hood, something that I added was that both the reverb and the plex delay, they're being modified with here a scene controller on the plex delay mix. And then on the reverb, I'm using the other way of doing it, I guess, which is using a control switch. Now, the way I've done it is that I've set a control switch to be on the mix over here. So right click the modifier for reverb, and I've set it to control switch 6. And here I can set 2 parameters that I want it to switch between. For the update rate, attack and release, I'd suggest putting attack release at 0, depending on the kind of feel that you want. Adding these, or putting these values higher, mean that when you're switching or turning the control switch on or off, you'll get a more gradual change between them. And that might actually be something cool to try out. So if you want a more gradual change between a long reverb and the shorter reverb, I'd suggest upping the release here. I'll actually do that now before playing so that we have an idea of how it affects that change. And then the attack means how quickly it adjusts. So I'd suggest let's put both of these at 400 and see how that sounds. And so with those attack and release functions, then you get a more gradual change, sort of like a fader knob that's mixing in that plex delay, and then also with the reverb, or the mix, and also how big the reverb is. So that can be quite useful regardless, but it's one of the ways, at least within the FM3, of circumnavigating the limitations of the device. Now for the cab, and this would be my suggestion given the sort of tones I think you're going for, and with the change of the amp, it'd be my suggestion to be using the Class A 30-watt Brilliant, is to also use the corresponding Dynacab, which I think sounds really good with this amp. And they're fairly basic settings, so I've got a ribbon mic and a dynamic mic here. And I've just lowered the distance because it's the kind of reaction or feel that I prefer. Of course, you can play around with this to get different kind of tones, or even try different IRs. That's completely up to you, of course. But I found this worked really quite well with when paired with this amp. And then for the filters here, I'm using a high cut and a low cut of 8K high cut, and then 80 Hertz for the low cut. And I'm doing it here instead of, say, putting an EQ block or something behind that. And then for the drive scenes, or the overdrive scenes, which was one of the big questions that you had, as noted in the preset that you sent, you were basically gunning the gain to such an extent, and then the amp as well, that you had no headroom, and then because of that, the clarity somewhat suffered, basically. So what I've done to keep consistency is that we're using the same amp at the same settings across all of the scenes, and the only thing I'm changing is in the drive block, we're using the model of the clone that's within the Fractal, which is gained up somewhat, and level is somewhat pulled back, but it gives the right amount of, I guess, clarity and gain that I would like, at least for these styles of tones, using a Strat like this one. And then on the clean scene, something I thought sounded quite cool as well in the preset that you sent was using sort of like a clean boost. In this case, we're using the Jam Ray drive with a touch of level, just to give a different kind of vibe and character to the clean sound. Now the other thing that I did is in the input gate, I upped the ratio. This will be guitar dependent. So depending on the guitar you use, you'll mess around with the threshold, for example, and the ratio will just be the amount of sort of noise reduction or gating that will be occurring. Oops. And I left the gate block in there in case. So if you find that with this kind of drive block, you want a bit more noise reduction, instead of changing on the input gate, you can do that, of course, or just activate and use the other gate. And for the compressor, for at least the clean scenes, I'm using the Studio FF compressor. That kind of works well, at least with this guitar. And on the funk scene, I'm using the one that you set up in there, as that kind of squash kind of worked quite well. I just lowered the compression a bit, as it seemed to suit this guitar better. Of course, these are things that you really have to dial to taste based on your guitar and based on what you're using, as the amount of compression will be dependent on the amount of gain from the guitar that's going in on the front end. So the higher up you turn the compression in this block, for example, the more compression that you'll get. But maybe you have a guitar that has lower output pickups than, say, this one or another guitar, and those things will make a difference. And the same thing goes for the gate. So there we go. I hope that was useful. It's quite involved, to be honest, as this is the first episode. I'm still kind of figuring things out on how best to, say, explain things or offer suggestions, and also with, say, my tweaked version, offer things that, you know, it's the same kind of tone, and it's subjective, of course, but things that would work better for me and what I would suggest given the context and the style of music in the preset that I've been sent. I've spent quite a bit of time on this, so much so that some of my lights have actually run out of battery. And what I'd just like to say is that if you're interested in sending in a preset or sending in a submission, please do, by all means. This is something that I'm trying to do on a more regular basis, and this can only work if you know, I get the community involved, per se. So if I have submissions, if I have presets that I can go through, then this works. If I get no submissions, this won't work. So I'll put more details in the description box below, and you can send your preset along with the submission to this handy email address that I'll put across the screen. And the more info you put in there, the easier it is for me. And hopefully I'll be able to do this series for a long time to come. So thanks a lot for watching. If you're interested in other Fractal videos that I made, I'll link to a playlist over here, and hope to see you in the next video. Take care.